lot of interesting stuff happens in the hallway. It happens, you get to walk out of a session and there's a collective experience that you just went through. And so there will be a hallway conversation that springs up discussing the material.
So my name is David Sankel, and this is a talk about the Beman Project, which is bringing standard libraries to the next level. I'm a principal scientist at Adobe in a team called the Software Technology Lab. And what my team is tasked to do is to try to figure out what's going to happen in the next 10 to 20 years in the software industry and try to help out the plans and how things are going to happen in the greater industry and in Adobe itself. So that's a little bit about me. This is about the Beman Project. So this is the drag and duck logo. Everybody who's in the Beman Project here who has a drag and duck shirt, stand up right now for a second. All right? Everybody give a hand of applause to these people, right? That's awesome. Hand of applause, you have no idea why, right? No, they're awesome contributors, and you're gonna see throughout this talk why this is happening. So what you know is that this is something about standards. It's about improving the standardization process. But let's begin by talking about where the standard actually comes from. How does this happen? So for me, when I got started in the C++, I had certain ideas on how the standard was created. And these are some of my ideas. Basically, it started with this guy, Bjarne Stroustrup, some genius programmer. And what he did, in my mind, is he would travel all around the world, different places. And he's visiting a couple places. Maybe he likes Europe for some reason. I don't know why. But anyway, he's traveling around the world. What's he doing? He's trying to find the best of the best, the best C++ programmers in the entire world, the brilliant genius minds. And once he's identified who these people are, he hand selects them. He says, you and you and you, come with me. We shall define the next C++ standard. And they go to a place called Bristol. Now, I didn't know where Bristol was. My apologies for the people in the UK who know where Bristol is, or the people who actually have geographically aware and can speak. But anyway, I thought that Bristol sounded pretty sophisticated. I just assumed that Bristol must be the top of a mountain. A great white mountain, and Bjarne and his hand-selected geniuses go up there, and they sit down and they meditate. They figure out what the next standard is going to be, and then Bjarne comes down from the mountain and says, "Behold, this is the next C++ standard." And then all these implementers will go and implement the standard, except for Microsoft. No. Microsoft, to be fair, has gotten a lot better with this. This is outdated information. But anyways, I thought that's how it worked. And this kind of idea persists to this day. I think it was just a couple years ago, someone approached me. They found out I was part of the standardization committee. They were like, wow, you were selected. And did you have to take a test? No, I didn't have to take a test. No, I wasn't selected. Let's talk about how this really works. First off, companies or individuals join the C++ standardization committee on their own election, right? Usually it just requires a bit of money. You join a standardization body. In the US, you got to pay some money. In other countries, sometimes you don't have to pay anything at all to be part of the standardization committee. But anyway, that's how it works. The biggest cost is actually just going to the meetings, flying out to the real Bristol and these different places. And most of the standards committees consisting of regular Jane programmers, right? They're not these brilliant superminds. Now, I will be honest, there are a couple of absolutely brilliant people on there. The kind of people that you talk to and you just feel so uncomfortable because you feel like they can see through you. They are so smart. There are a couple of those people, but generally, the regular Jane programmers, with the caveat, there's an atypical passion for C++. Not a big surprise. And also along these same lines, there are people that got pretty good at understanding C++, the corners of it. And sometimes they come to the committee with this information, but a lot of times they just learn it by being part of the committee. What the hell? Come on, Microsoft Teams. That's how it is. And decisions are made via consensus. If there's 2 people in favor for every 1 person against a proposal, the proposal goes through and it becomes part of the next standard. And finally, meetings aren't held on gigantic snowy mountains. It's like meeting rooms in hotels. Okay, not super glamorous. What's that? Sometimes it happens in Hawaii, but it's a meeting room in a hotel with no windows in Hawaii. It almost makes it worse that it's in Hawaii, to be honest with you. So what happens with a standardization proposal? Like, what's the lifetime of such a thing? So starting out, you get a proposal in, someone writes a paper, and frequently it goes to a study group, okay? And this is optional. There are some proposals go to study groups, some don't. This is like a specialized group that is focused on one area. So like ranges, for example, has a study group, and if you write a range paper, it's gonna start there. And they're gonna have these people that are really in that domain, and they're gonna help you out with your paper. After that, it goes to the Library Evolution Incubator Group, which is a different room. And what this group is responsible for is basically preparing a proposal for the next stage, the evolution, library evolution review. You know, making sure that it has all the required information, does it have examples, but they also determine if this is a proposal that's actually worthwhile to do. You know, is this, like, we have a limited time in the committee, we can't do all the good things, we really can't. So the decision needs to be made is like, do we want to spend time on this? And that decision happens in the Library Evolution Incubator. Once you get past that stage, you go to library evolution. And library evolution will do a design review of the proposal. They'll look at the proposal, they'll look at the examples, and they'll say, like, yes, is this consistent with good development practices? Is it consistent with the rest of the standard? Do we like this? Again, at every single stage, it can be rejected. Then it goes to the library people. These are the wording review experts. These are the people who love the like shalls and can'ts and like very, very specific words, like extremely detailed. And some people are really into this. Like I'm in the other rooms mostly. Honestly, I will go to library review just if I want to like meditate and just like chill. Like it's kind of nice sometimes to just think about, what does that word mean? Once it goes through library, then it will go to plenary, and there's a vote in the working draft, okay? And then everybody in plenary, all these different companies say whether or not they think this proposal should move forward. Usually the answer is yes. Sometimes last minute things come up, and I'm kind of notorious for having a couple of these like, hey, I disagree with this proposal because of X, Y, and Z. They try not to have people like me do that, but this is like the last minute concerns. This is where they're raised, and then after that, you go into the working draft, okay? That's how it happens. Now, one of the things you'll notice that the thing that's moving through this whole process is a paper, okay? And usually papers come with some kind of implementation, right? Like, but the quality varies a lot. Like you may have an implementation which is a Godbolt link, and that's the implementation of the proposal. Sometimes you get proposals with like really good implementations, like they have like a lot of like community review and experience. But when it comes to the committee, usually the question asked is, does it have an implementation? As if like, in any conceivable universe, could this be implemented? Is the question that's being asked. Okay, now I wonder, for the people in this room, for you, most of you work for software engineering organizations, how many of you work with a process to where you design a feature and it's all completely designed in terms of what the code should look like, what the interfaces should look like, and then you approve it through this whole process, and then you ship it to your customer right after that? How many of you do that? A couple? Okay. Not too often. I'll tell you, like, at Adobe, we don't do things like that. Let me explain how it works at Adobe. So at Adobe, we start out with a concept. Someone has this idea, and then there's a prototype, and people start using the prototype, and we get feedback there. And then it goes to design because the prototype interface obviously sucked. So we go to the designers, and they make a beautiful interface for it. And then we get the design vetted by a whole bunch of different users. And then it goes to pre-release. So we send it out to a bunch of users, like trusted users in our community, and say like, hey, what do you think about this feature? Does it solve your problem? We collect all this feedback. We have user studies. And then, only then do we go to beta, where we send it out to a whole bunch of other people, like a larger group of people, get all their feedback from that, get and incorporate that into what the design is and how it's going to look, and does this actually work? And only after that do we release it for general availability, and does it end up as a feature in one of our products. That's how we do things, and I think it actually works pretty well. We've won a couple of like technical Emmy awards because of our software, because this is used to make things like The Mandalorian. And the thing is, like, we're incorporating in our process a whole bunch of feedback from our users. It's not magic. We don't have a genius who's just like, I'm the Photoshop genius, I'm going to make the next feature, and then that's how it happens. It's like we get a lot of feedback, and this like makes our process work really well. So the problem here is that with C++, we're not doing that really. You know, sometimes it happens, but it's not like part of the process. We don't get a lot of, I haven't seen a user study. Like I haven't seen like a lot of feedback from users being incorporated into the decision-making process. I don't see that actually changing proposals as they move through. So that's kind of what we're about. So there's this guy, Jeff Garland, okay? And I asked him for a headshot, and this is what he gave. Seriously, Jeff. So anyway, Jeff was having a conversation at C++ Now with Zach Lane and Brett Bound, and he can't remember the other people that were part of the conversation, but he remembers they were people, okay? It's good enough. And they basically had this conversation about like, well, how can we improve our standardization process to be able to get more user feedback and that kind of thing? Right? And so in parallel, Jeff is having this conversation. Inbal Levy, who's the LEWG, Library Evolution Working Group Chair, she's also having conversations with people in LEWG. I have all question marks here because we can't talk about who said what in Library Evolution Working Group. That's a more legit reason to have a question mark. So she had this, there was one proposal that came through that, and it was stood indirect. And everybody just thought like, man, this proposal did things right. There was an implementation and the paper that were part of the same repository. There was a bunch of feedback that went into it. And Inbal was like, you know, I wouldn't want to like require this as a policy, but man, wouldn't it be nice if we could make this easier for people to do this kind of thing? So Inbal and Jeff got together, had a bunch of conversations about this, and then it took a whole year for Jeff to take this over to the Boost Foundation. And he went to the Boost Foundation and said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we developed something that we could help the standards committee process by providing this user feedback? And I'm the executive director of the Boost Foundation, and this is where I found out about the project, the idea. And the Boost Foundation was like, yeah, that would be great. And that's like really aligned with our mission with helping out the C++ community. So we said, go ahead. And basically, Jeff started with some like basic ideas, like, hey, I don't really know how to do this, like, how is this gonna happen? And he brought it to C++ Now. And C++ Now 2024, this is only a few months ago when this happened. This was a game changer, right? Not beyond the amount of community support for this project and energy into this project was beyond my wildest dreams. I think Jeff probably also, yeah, he's shaking his head yes, also beyond his wildest dreams. Nobody knew that this was gonna be such a big deal, but it ended up being a big deal. And I'm talking about people sitting in front of whiteboards and trying to decide like, okay, what should the license be? There are people huddling around a laptop with Brett Brown. Where's Brett? Over there. You know, trying to figure out like, how are we gonna get Conan to work with this thing? What should the CMake look like? How do we advertise this? Let's make a website. This is all happening in Aspen, Colorado, beautiful mountains in the background. Actually, so there was mountains there. There was even like discussions had during hikes that people were having at C++ Now 2024. So this is where Beman really got its start. And so we came up with a mission there. And this is part of the mission, and I was part of the small working group with Richard Powell. There were a couple others that were working on this, and we came up with the Beman Project mission, and this is it. Support the efficient design and adoption of the highest quality C++ standard libraries. That's what the Beman Project is about. But it's not just what we're doing, it's how we're doing it. And how we're doing this is through implementation experience, which means we're going to actually try to implement the standards proposals before they get standardized. Right? It's about getting user feedback and getting these libraries in front of people, collecting the feedback and putting that as part of the process. It's about technical expertise And the amazing technical expertise, the people that are part of this project, we'll talk more about this later, contributing to this has just been phenomenal. And by the way, the exact wording that we used here was written by Chandler Carruth. He was there, we were at a bar, we were working on figuring out what this mission is, and Chandler Carruth is like, hey, this is my deal. I can make a really good mission statement. And he did. He totally nailed it. Okay, cool. We got a mission. We need a name. Why are we calling this the Beman Project? So there's this guy, Beman Dawes. Okay, he recently deceased in 2020. He's one of the Boost co-founders, and he was the WG21 Library Working Group chair. Now, Beman had a huge impact on the people he interacted with, and I am one of the people that I feel very lucky to have been able to interact with him while he was still with us. And I just want to pull out some quotes about what it was like working with Beman. So Dave Abrahams said, a living demonstration that collegial respect and kindness are fundamental to getting great results. Howard Hinnett said, he was a friend, he was a giant, he will be missed. Emil said, he was always kind, and through my experience with him, I am honored to have had a chance to work with this brilliant member of our community. You get the sense of what kind of guy this was, right? And this idea of like what this man represents is at the core of what the Beman Project is. So it was easy. As soon as somebody said, hey, we got to name it after Beman, it was like, oh yeah, absolutely. We want to do that. Okay, we got a name, we got a mission, we need a logo, right? The dragon duck. So we found this picture of Beman sitting on, what the hell is this thing? I don't even know. How did this even happen? Okay, but anyway, there's one of the few pictures that we have of Beman is him sitting on this thing, okay? And Inbal had the idea, she was like, you know what? We should use that dragon duck thing. And she was really hesitant to allow me to do this, but she eventually relented. She said, this should be our logo. And everybody loved the dragon duck idea, but this logo is kind of, I don't know, something off about it, right? And she wanted to make sure that I clarified when I'm up here talking about this, that this was done at 2 a.m. her time using paint.net, okay? That's how this happened. Okay, so then we've got Saksham comes in and he's like, AI magic, and we spit out the dragon duck logo. And so we're all walking around like Power Rangers wearing this shirt, right? This is how the dragon duck happened, and it's very cool. What else do we need in a project? Well, we need core principles. What are we about? And there are 4, and these are encoded in the Beman standard. The first one is highest quality. When someone's using a C++ standard library, a standard library impacts more people than anything else, right? We're talking millions and millions of people. Why would we ever compromise on quality for the standard library? So our number 1 tenet is no compromise, highest quality. We want to have the highest quality libraries here for people to use. Number 2, production ready. If we're going to get production feedback, we need to have something that people can use in production. That implies good documentation, implies reliable software, and implies, some elements of portability to it, right? So this is also part of our core tenets. Number 3, industry standard technology. Where there's industry consensus on best practices, we should take advantage. We're not here to innovate on tooling. We're not here to innovate on style. No. Other people are doing that. The industry has consensus on a lot of things, like, for example, CMake. I mean, we could go the route of invent our own build system, but that's not serving our purpose, right? So we're going to just stick with what industry consensus has already reached. Number 4, and this one's really important, and this kind of gets to the heart of Beman, a welcoming and inclusive community. We need to have an unobstructed path for people to be able to use our libraries, to be able to review our libraries, to contribute to Beman libraries. It's got to be smooth. And we're talking about ergonomics, we're talking about cross-industry participation, cultural accommodation. Maybe someone isn't part of those, stuffy rooms in Hawaii, and they can't go there and actually contribute to anything to the standard. We want them to be included in that. Maybe someone has like family obligations. Or maybe someone's like an absolute brilliant genius, but they have absolutely no time at all or tolerance for getting shouted at on a listserv, right? So we want to make sure that we have an inclusive community. We've adopted the Carbon Code of Conduct, which is a fantastic human-readable thing where we're trying to be able to be welcoming and stuff like that. And nobody's perfect at this. I'm certainly not. I certainly have gone off before and said things that I absolutely regret. We're going to help each other use the right words to make sure that people feel like they can come and they feel welcome and they feel like this is a place that they want to be. There's like a positive energy to it. So that's what we're doing with that. Cool. Now we get to like some of the more boring, nerdy, I want to say nerd snipe, bike shedding kind of things. So Inbal and Zach and Brett Brown, and there were others that were part of this conversation, they kind of figured out some of the things, some of the details about this. So the first thing is, what license are we going to use, right? And we settled on the Apache license version 2.0 with LLVM exceptions as the recommended license because this has gotten broad industry use, broad industry support. Boost is also okay as a license. MIT is also permitted. But we want to make sure that people can use the libraries in any kind of application. And one of the things that's nice about the Apache license with LLVM exceptions, and also Boost has this as well, is that you can link it into an executable and you don't have to give attribution because it's hard to give attribution like when you're distributing firmware or something like that. Cool. Now we got past the boring stuff. What's the lifetime of a Beman library? And Zach Lane really contributed this idea. So basically, you start with a C++ standardization paper. That's the entry point. You're not going to have a Beman library unless there's a paper targeted for standardization, right? So someone creates a paper. And this is where Beman starts coming in. The library gets created. Maybe it'll be the author of the paper that's making the library. Maybe it'll be someone else. Maybe it'll be one of you. Anybody can make a library out of the paper. Then we get feedback on the paper and the code all happening in this Beman community. And then once all that feedback is incorporated, it can get accepted into a working draft, an ISO, right? So you're seeing like the difference. This is about adding all this feedback, all this community participation in the standardization process. Once it gets accepted into a working draft, it gets delisted as a Beman library after 2 standard cycles. Why do we do that? Why would we like delist it? There are actually really good reasons for delisting after something has been in the standard for a little while. First, it encourages standard adoption. We're not here to try to get people to use Beman libraries instead of the standard, right? If a Beman library graduates to the standard, then like use the standard. And by having this cycle of like, okay, after 2 standard cycles, it's been 6 years since it's been in the standard, we also helping people kind of move along to the standard, right? Number 2, we're avoiding this legacy accumulation of just like all these old libraries that are like nobody really wants to use anymore, but we feel like we need to maintain. We just kind of eliminate that whole thing, where we have a finite number of libraries that are listed in Beman over time. Now, a library author might say like, hey, I want to support really, really old stuff. Whatever, that's cool. It's just not going to be part of the official Beman list, right? So that's just up to the author if they want to do that. And also, any time the standardization process says, you know what, we really do not want this in the standard, like we're just going to reject this proposal, then it's really no longer qualifies to be part of the Beman project, right? Because we're helping standardization proposals. So something can get delisted from Beman if it got like soundly rejected at the standardization committee. Cool. So I want to highlight some of the things that are in Beman already, because there's already been libraries that have been created here. And Beman.optional 26 has come out, and this has been a collaboration between Steve Downey and Darius Nietu. Basically, there were 2 different proposals that were targeting stud optional. And what they did is they got together and they put the proposals in one implementation so that you can try all the new optional 26 stuff. And you can go on the internet, you can download this, play with it right now. But I'll walk you through some examples here. So first we're going to talk about optional being a range. That's one of the new features in Stud Optional. So you just include Beman optional 26 optional.hcpp. Like this is going to be, all Beman libraries are included in kind of the same way. Make a little namespace alias here so that your code doesn't have ridiculously long namespaces everywhere. Create your optional, and then what is this? We're iterating over an optional? So basically, the feature of rangified optional means that optional is kind of like a range of 0 or 1 elements. Now, I don't know if you'd ever want to actually write code like this. We'll look at a more realistic example in a second, but maybe this is one way to say like, hey, here's a safe way to access the data that an optional has in a safe way. Look, there's no like stars here. There's no like unsafe code. But anyway, I probably wouldn't do this anyway. So a better example we have is a person. Okay, so here's a class person, and a person's attributes like eye color, whatever, these are optional. So we have an optional eye color data member, not a data member, this is a member function, returning an optional string. We create a vector of people, and what we want to do is we want to compute the eye colors of all people. We have our big people list, and we want to get everybody's eye colors. So the first thing we do, we're going to use ranges here, is we transform this range. And we transform it by using the eye color member function here. So now we, instead of having a range of person, we are going to have a range of optional strings, right? This is already there. And then here's where the magic happens, views join. Views join, what this does is it takes a range of ranges and makes it into just a range by concatenating the internal ranges, right? Now, because optional is a range, essentially what we're doing is we're removing all the nones from it and getting all the optionals that actually have a value. Then we convert this into a set, and then we convert it into a vector. We convert it into a set, which removes all duplicated elements, and then we convert it into a vector, and then we get our final result. And just on a side note, man, ranges is slow to compile. This thing took forever to compile. I'm so sad about that. Anyway, slight digression. Another cool thing about optional 26 is you can have an optional of a reference. So if you have a function like this where you have find value, so find value takes in a vector of int and a value that you're trying to find, the way that we do that today, the interface usually returns an iterator, right? Which is kind of awkward, right? Then you got to compare the iterator to end to see if there's a value there. That's not really what you're trying to communicate. Instead, you can just return an optional int reference, and I don't know, that's a lot easier to use. It kind of makes a lot of sense, you know? If you're trying to find something, you either didn't find it or you found it, an optional int reference makes a lot of sense. So that's pretty cool. Another library by Tomas Hadezi is Beman in-place vector. So this one is still under development, but you can try it. I think it's functionally complete anyway. What you do is you create an in-place vector like you'd create a normal vector, but you notice there's this extra template argument there, right? And that template argument isn't like the array where it sets the size of the vector. This is actually the capacity of the vector. And it's not allocating this in using an allocator. This is using stack space to create the vector. And this is really nice because you can make a in-place vector instead of a std vector if you know that the size is never going to be over a certain point. This is going to be wicked fast, right? No allocations, right on the stack. You're going to get nice cache coherence if you have if it's part of a data structure or something along those lines. So you can push back 1, 2, and 3. This has a vector of size 3, so what happens when you push back 4? Throws a std bad alloc. So it's basically a drop-in replacement for a vector, but something with a fixed capacity. And there's other cool methods, which I won't go into here. There's like try pushback and some other neat things. But here it is. You know, you can download it, you can try it, you can give feedback on it, you can use it in production, and absolutely encourage you to do that. Here's another highlight I want to mention. So Brett Brown and Darius worked hard on this. Beman.example. What is this thing? It's a Beman library that's an exemplar for writing libraries. So it represents the best practices, all these minds that were working on this, the best practices for making an open source C++ library in general, right? Just clone this thing, change the name, And you've got unit testing, you've got examples, you've got documentation, you've got a good CMake build. Who the hell knows how to make a good CMake build, right? There's a couple. Like very few people feel like, oh yeah, I got this, I can make an awesome CMake build. Like, there's all this discomfort. Well, here's a great example that you can use on how to use the best practices. There are sanitizers that are part of it. There's continuous integration. Like, it's there, it's available. And if you want to make a Beman library, how easy is that? Copy, paste, change a few things, and work on your library. Another thing I want to talk about are the discussions that we have. Some of the discussions are so engaging. Lit is an example. Okay, so Lit is a unit testing framework that's used in LLVM. And Louis Dion suggested, like, hey, maybe Beman Project should use this unit testing library. And this led to a huge discussion about, like, what is unit testing? How do we unit test that something shouldn't compile? Like, Lit has a cool feature where something shouldn't compile and it should give an error with this error message, right? Like, some really brilliant ideas. And then we had discussion about, like, what belongs in a standard, like a library framework, how important are dependencies on things. Anyway, I don't think anybody participated in this discussion I don't think anybody participated that did not come out with something new that they learned, right? So just by being part of this discussion, like, you hone your skill. And I love seeing this in the community. And also, Laura Savino had this really cool idea. She's like, wouldn't it be cool if, like, some of these discussions, like the Lit discussion, had a tag on it and call it, like, a Dawes discussion, as just one of those discussions that happened in the past that was, like, so illuminating for people, so that newcomers coming to the project can just go and learn, right? Even though discussions already happened. I thought that was a brilliant idea. And we're already starting to see results. Okay, so STUD optional. There's been excellent feedback coming from the STUD optional implementation. This resulted in substantial paper updates, changes to the wording. Like, the thing that we set out to do, it's happening, right? The implementation is tracking the paper changes. So what you get in Beman is the most up-to-date standard spec. And STUD optional as a range, that particular paper, that got accepted in the standardization committee with a full Beman implementation. So people in library working group, people in evolution working group had access to this thing and could use it and try it out. STUD in-place vector, another success story. Even though it's, like, just starting to get created. There's already been, as part of the implementation, as part of the reviews of the implementation, library working group issues that got created that are going to be discussed because there's going to be fixes to the paper before it gets standardized because of this whole big community process and getting all this feedback. STUDnet, where's Dietmar? Dietmar, over there, right? He's working on STUDnet, and now he has a much broader feedback base available. He's identified pain points in STUD execution, and I just want to plug his talk. It was 2 days ago. If you didn't see it, you can watch it online. If you're watching online, you can also watch it online. Creating a sender-receiver HTTP server, and you can see him walk through using the Beman library to create an HTTP, I think it's an HTTP service, right? An HTTP server, like, in real time using the Beman library. It's very, very cool. So what's coming up? Well, we have Dietmar's Beman Execution 26. We have Dietmar coming up with Net 29. So this is going to be the way that we are going to do networking in C++. And with this, you don't have to wait for your compiler to implement it, right? Jump into the Beman project. Get started while it's still being worked on. Try using it. Kick the tires of this thing. Give feedback. Like, this is going to be incredibly useful. This is going to improve the standard before it gets out.
Help me with implementation.
Dietmar says, help me with implementation. Absolutely. Jump in. Talk with him about it. You're interested in this? Talk with Dietmar. This week, after this talk, right away. Alistair Meredith from Bloomberg is working on a Beman testing resource library. And this is going to be a way for you to write a allocator-aware type and be able to test it using a potential, a standard, to test your allocator-aware type in a standard way with this framework. Elias Kuzunin says he's going to be making a Beman SCN lib, right? So we have FMT in the standard, right, to format output. This is going to do the opposite, like be able to read stuff from a stream into your types. And there's so much more. Like we've had, Jeff and I have had, and many others in part of the Beman Project have had discussions with tons of people this week who come up to us and say, hey, I need to like get this into Beman. Like absolutely, we're gonna have a lot of libraries that are coming in. So there's also one other thing which I'm very excited that's going to be coming to Beman. And that is your contributions. You didn't think I was just going to talk about Beman and not invite you to participate. Number one, easiest thing to do, go to Beman, download it, download a library, use it, give feedback, right? Then you're part of the standardization process, right? You're giving feedback, the feedback that we desperately need in the standardization committee from professional users like yourself. We'll get professional feedback, feedback from the people that are going to actually use this thing before something gets standardized. That will be incredibly useful. And this is easy to do. Another thing is if you go to the Beman Project, so bemanproject.org and GitHub, and go to the Beman repo, there's a bunch of issues listed. And you'll see some like implement Beman ranges and views, implement Beman units and quantities, implement Beman bounds tests. And you'll see these things mentioned like good first issue, help wanted. And a lot of these things, they have mentors attached to them. So not only can you jump in and do Beman implementations of these things, but you get like an expert mentor that's gonna help you out and do it with you. Isn't that freaking cool? I think that's awesome. You can join the discourse, so discourse.bemanproject.org. This is where the discussions are happening. You can join the GitHub conversations. Check out the review for Beman in-place vector. You'll learn just by reading the review comments in there by like world-class experts. Chime in on the review. Do your own review of the thing. You can raise issues and say like, hey, this didn't work for me under this circumstance. Maybe you ought to consider like changing it. Or you can do PRs. Right? Improve the implementation. All of this is available to you, and this is something that is like, I don't know, I'm excited about it. I'm at a loss for words. Maybe you can't tell, but I am excited about this. But you might think, okay, look, that's fine. There are all these wizards out there that can do that stuff with Beman and like contribute to the standards. Not me, I mean, come on. Like, let me give you an example, conversation that we had that I love pointing to. So we created one of these issues, like good first issue. Could somebody make a Beman in-place vector library, right? Mentors are available. Here's a couple of implementations that have already been made that you can actually grab and use in this new implementation. Hells 15 comes in and says, hey, I'd be interested in implementing this, but I gotta ask, what C++ knowledge is required? Would you accept help from someone who's not professional? Are you really looking for someone with more experience? This was the response. Hey, I think intermediate C++ competence would be helpful, but don't worry about asking beginner questions. We all start somewhere, and we're happy to help. You see that spirit of Beman in there? That's the spirit of Beman. And Hells 15 says, in that case, I would be happy to take on the project. He did, and now we have Beman in-place vector, right? Now it's there. So who's part of Beman? So there are 3 leads. There's Jeff Garland, myself, Inbal Levy, who unfortunately was not able to make it. She really wishes that she was here. Like, it's just killing her that she's not here as part of this. I want to list out some of the core contributors that we have. Dietmar Kuhl, Steve Downey, Zach Lane, Linus Bohm, Saksam Sharma, Tomas Hedzi, Darius Nieto, Brett Brown, Ben Craig, Richard Powell. These people are just jumping in and are rocks in this project. And then we have all the community participants, people just jumping in and like giving some comment in a library or some comment in a discussion. And like, look at these names, like you recognize these names. We're talking people like Hannah Dusikova, Chandler Carruth, Louis Dion, Dave Abraham, Sean Parent, Peter Dimov, Jonathan Wakely, Andres Weiss. I mean, there are so many people. And it is awesome that like now this is accessible to these people, right? You don't have to fly over to some random place and be in a meeting room. Like, it's right here. You can join in and be part of it, and you can take so much away from it. So, I have a challenge for you, right? Here's my challenge for this week. Take a look at the Beman projects. Find a paper that you're interested in contributing to, right? And like, you want to hack, you want to implement this paper. You're surrounded by people who are interested in C++. We're at CppCon. You'd be able to find one person that would work on that with you, right? No, you'd find 5 people that would be interested in the same thing that you're interested in. Grab your laptops, go outside, it's beautiful outside, sit in the mountains, and hack on this thing, right? Work on it. Find someone with the Power Ranger thing, right? Call them over and say like, hey, we're working on this thing. Like, work it out. This is how standard libraries are created. This is how standard libraries, how the feedback gets incorporated. And then, when I come and give this talk next year as an update, I'll be chasing you to get the little photo to put in here, all right? So, this concludes my talk. And we have a lot of time for questions. I know that you all are anxious to ask questions about this. And I want to thank you all for coming to the talk, for participating. I hope to see you in and participating in the Beman Project. Right now, I'm going to call up all the people working on Beman that are in this room, everybody with the ridiculous shirt, come on up. They're going to help answer questions. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. All right, go ahead.
All right, yeah, I really don't know where I should stand because I'm already a part of the Beman Project organization on GitHub, so I'm willing to help. This is a great initiative. I don't have a t-shirt still, so maybe in the future, but I also have some worries about the pipeline, about the process. You mentioned that the pipeline starts from the paper, right? But we talk for ages in the community that we should not standardize things that are only on the paper, right? I don't think that starting with the paper might be the best idea. I always say that I will write a paper when my library is proven in production and it has some users, has some feedback, and then I will start writing a paper, not other way around, right? So maybe it should be clearly stated that those libraries maybe should be written outside of the Beman project, mature a bit, and then be imported inside rather than starting from the paper, right? If you're doing something small like optional 26, then sure, you can start with the paper because it's quite simple and then implement. But if you're doing physical units library, senders receivers, scanlib or FMT, whatever, it takes years to mature, right? So doing this, starting from the paper approach may not be the good idea.
Right. So I think the way you said that was a little less, it's not really necessary to have the paper first. In fact, if you want to just build a library and you think this is something that should be standardized, you can certainly come and have that conversation with us. You can, create a repo, create a library, and we will help do that, basically. So I think, the way he said it was not quite accurate in terms of the policy. However, it's easy enough to get a paper number and, have an outline. So, obviously, you know how to write the papers. It's not like that's really a problem. But yeah, we're very much at the beginning, right? And so right now we're kind of playing catch up with like C++26. So, for the future, we would love to see that years of experience, honed and through production and so forth. So yeah, hopefully that answers, yeah.
I think it makes sense actually to indeed start with a paper. A, other people see there's something out there working on that towards standardization. And B, it is not something which develops over there and then gets dropped and doesn't become a standard, or we don't go the mile. So a little bit between what Jeff and David are saying. I think we probably want. I think we should make it a paper, even if it's not complete. It's just an idea. But here it is, and is a standard interested, right? Maybe there's actually early feedback. We are not interested at all.
You wanna shift the process. My friend Titus always talks about shifting left. So the earlier you have a paper that's published and like visible by the, by the community, the quicker you'll get feedback. And it'll like, I'm not saying that you would go off it in a bad direction, but I used to sometimes go off in bad directions until I started like shifting left in my process, publishing a document first, getting feedback, and then deciding if it was worth taking the extra and making the extra effort to actually do the implementation. So I think the further left you can shift, in this case, like with a paper, maybe the better, but I'm not.
Right. I have also one small other question, because I was not aware about the issue about continuous library in Beman Project. I was surprised to see an issue there. And actual issue in middle size inside of the project says, someone should rewrite my library to follow my paper, but my paper will not have any interfaces specified before I actually write my library. So it's like a chicken and egg problem again. So please don't rewrite this. I spent 7 years doing that. I'm on board. I will share my library with you. Don't spend your time on this. And I'm going to the stage.
Come on up.
Sir, do you think large?
Medium.
Medium?
We're out of room.
By the way,
All right, go ahead with your next question.
All right. Thank you for the talk. It's very exciting to kind of see this get started up. And I'm very sad that I missed out on in-place vector, because that would have been fun. But anyway, I'm sure that there's other equally exciting projects that are up on Beman. But one thing that I was just kind of wondering about, I think it's a really good approach that you guys are taking about with the two standard cycles or something, and then it kind of gets delisted, because you do otherwise have this problem of just indefinite cruft building up forever. I wasn't going to say it directly, but yes. But so my question is, it sounds like we are also actively encouraging companies to actually ship this into production. So what happens if they ship something that is then ultimately delisted because it wasn't picked up by the standard? I'm just kind of curious what happens in that situation.
I will speak to that because I influenced the slides in a bit. You may have seen the namespace alias. Mm-hmm. If the Beman project indeed covers what the standard does, just use a namespace when you do it in production. Mm-hmm. It gets delisted, you replace the namespace alias by SCD, done. Mm-hmm.
Well, but what I'm wondering about is a situation where we have a project that makes it into Beman that is then ultimately not picked up for standardization. Like companies shipped it into prod, but I'm just kind of curious, what happens in that situation?
So the old tarball release is a stable tarball release. You will not get bug fixes. You will not get patches.
I gotcha. Okay.
It will not work with C++, with GCC 28 or whatever you end up on, right? Mm-hmm. So and we're saying this up front. So if you adopt it in your code base, it is in some ways already deprecated. So be prepared for what Dietmar was talking about. Mm-hmm. If that is not acceptable for your code base, it's probably not what you want to adopt for your code base.
I gotcha. So
and one more thing is, in addition to what Dietmar said, that is a very toolable thing. It would be a good idea for someone that's interested in code transformation technology to jump in and say, hey, if it's just namespace rewriting, I could do that. And maybe there's a Beman fix-up tool that, just dump it back.
That is a cool idea.
Or something.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. So, it sounds like the takeaway is we expect this to be production grade, productionally robust, but there is also still that question of it has to get picked up ultimately or it will get deprecated.
Right. Exactly. It is supposed to support the standardization efforts. That's the primary purpose of this. But it's not like if and when the library gets delisted, it disappears off the internet. It is still there. It's just not part of the Beman project.
Right. Thank you.
One other follow-up about this, just so we're talking about Boost, right? One of the fundamental problems with Boost is it's an all-in thing, okay? One of the fundamental things about Beman is we want every library to stand on its own. So just because it's part of Beman doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to take that single library by itself. That's the only part of Beman you want. Just go get that one library. You don't have to drag along the entire rest of the thing.
And it's dependencies.
And its dependencies, of course. So the dependency management is a big part of what Brett and others have been working on because, of course, it's a real problem, right? And so anyway, thank you. I'll cut it at that. We've got 10 minutes.
Thanks for the talk. This is an exciting and interesting way to approach standardization. I like the way that this is going. As far as getting involved, would you recommend looking first at GitHub issues or getting involved in the discourse to see like what is next projects that need to be implemented or things like that? Or
I would say both. You know,
okay.
And the GitHub project where you have the list of issues, that's like perfect. It's like, oh,
Okay.
here's a ready chunk that I can take on and just message like, I'm gonna work on this.
Okay, that sounds good. And then I don't know if there was anything about your stance on making these libraries available in other tooling. Like, will people be able to use it like via Conan or VC package or things like that?
Those are both goals. I have an in-progress pull request to use a fairly new feature of Conan where you can provide a repository on the disk just to keep it lightweight. We are looking for volunteers, and at some point there will be ongoing volunteers needed to go through the process of getting the library. Each library, because they're standing on their own, will need to get listed in like Conan, VC package, other places. So the answer is that is a goal. We need more volunteers in that space. I could eventually maybe personally get around to all that, but the timeline will not be as fast as if other people chip in.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's going to grow a lot as eventually.
Right. And yeah, so we are committed to using standard expected technologies for this, and we need it to be accessible. You should, if you're used to a Conan workflow, you should just be able to say Beman optional 26, however that's spelled, as your dependency, and you get it. Including rebuilt with the sanitizers on if you use that profile or whatever that is. And that's, again, because that's industry standard practice. You would not ship to prod if you couldn't do those workflows for yourself. So why would we ship to the standard library without that?
Right. So. Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, guys.
How small is too small for a Beman library? So like, let's say I wanted to write one extra member function to a standard container or class. Is that too small? Or what would be like the lower threshold?
I would lean towards if you want to do it, right?
Okay.
Like it doesn't hurt anything. If you're adding one member to std string, get a string implementation and add the member to it, and then people can use the new std string thing. Like I think that's totally fine.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
There is another option, as you're well aware, right? Which you could go and make a branch of, Clang or the other one and do it that way. But I do think the optional is an interesting use case there because obviously you've got a full implementation of the regular optional in Beman with it's really only a few things that are added to it. So, but it makes it usable in a very nice context. I'll be the first to say it's a big bar to take vector implementation, but you're good. You can do it,
and we can help you. Yeah.
Okay, so some of this has been, I think, addressed in the question before previous. But again, so you basically need volunteers to support other package managers, right?
Yep.
So, but let's say I have a build system that, I say, oh, okay, so Beman is good. I want to support my build system with it. So I don't use CMake. Let's have our build system, and so I add the specs to Beman Project. What are the expectations, and is it something that we needs to be discussed? Is what are the expectations? What is the contract on maintaining that thing? Because, for example, I may use some version of Beman, then I go off on some other project, and my build system is no longer supported. But who is going to support it? And is it possible to have some sort of limitations that says, okay, CMake is going to be supported for a lifetime, but this system is not?
There's not currently any scope to work on direct support for other build systems. It's not necessarily against the Beman. You saw the principles and the core values and stuff. So on there, it didn't say our core value is use CMake. It's just use what everyone's using, right?
Okay.
If it became a good use of time and we had the volunteers for it and there were sufficiently useful build system supports to add, we could talk about that. I would expect that being in package managers should solve a lot of those issues.
Right.
Some people are not in package management ecosystems. They like vendor run their dependencies or something. We do, they are in GitHub, so that's already, like on some build systems work that way. Give me a git ref and I can get that.
Right.
And we'll be using GitHub releases. So to the extent you can just use that tarball if that's better for your workflow. So now that's what's going to be supported. If someone comes in and says, yeah, but I really need you to add these extra files to every single library so it works with my build system, well, that's going to be harder. Where again, we're trying not to innovate too much in the tooling space. There may be a certain small amount that we end up doing accidentally in the purpose of serving the other core goals, but it's not something we're like aggressively doing right now.
Okay.
If people are excited about that space though, let's talk, possibly we could talk about something.
Just very briefly though, the Beman projects are meant to be all laid out the same. So if you build your build tool around that, hopefully that could work without actually Beman direct supporting it.
Thank you.
So yeah, first of all, it's been very inspirational and motivating talk. But the question I have is a little bit of refinement of one of the previously asked one, but not about the listing libraries which companies may use and rely upon, but about changing. So if I understood the idea and the motivation of Beman Project correctly, the library implementation in Beman should be compatible with the paper and not the previous version of itself. Mm-hmm. So, and as certain papers are constant flux, it can change considerably, and changes could be as small as one mechanical replace of, one identifier to another, and some of them make huge changes which require a whole paradigm shift. Do you have any opinion and advice for companies who maybe, hesitant to embark on such things, which could break the binding compatibility and condemn them to massive large-scale refactoring because of the change?
Let me try to respond to that. This is just like when Adobe releases a beta, right? If Adobe releases a beta feature in Photoshop or something like that, and then immediately companies start adding that to their workflow, that's a dangerous move, right? Now, if something gets committed to and the standard says no, this is part of the working draft, then it kind of becomes solidified, and I would say, yeah, you could depend on it. But once it's in the beta stage, if it's in the early stages, just expect that there's going to be churn in what the library does, especially as it stabilizes. And it's just the nature of the thing, right? That there is change as part of the process of making better quality libraries. So I don't know.
And again, as something I think boosts, or where the boost libraries do not pick up what the standard necessarily does, and they deviate in some shape or form. The objective over here is it converges to what the standard does and then moves on. So yeah, expect breakage.
Okay.
Red, black.
Oh, the last one.
Great talk, thank you. I think the excitement was infectious. Regarding delisting things, I understand the motivation to get people to move on to standard. All of that makes sense. I work at Meta. We have several giant mono repos, and so we track the standard. We do advance, but it is slower than I personally would like. And I really enjoyed what Abseil did for a while, where it was sort of a polyfill, where you could get stood string view before it was really ready, until now your compiler switch says, oh, now you actually have stood string view, and Abseil string view was just an alias for stood string view. Do you have any thoughts or goals around supporting these kinds of let me use tomorrow's library today and then have it automatically turn into the real thing once my tool chain catches up?
I would just say that's a really interesting idea. Let's talk about that. Let's see what that looks like.
Deal.
Cool.
Hi. Brilliant talk. Very inspirational. I have a question with regards to usage. So in Photoshop, you have those nice beta testers who can give their feedback and use it. What about the library? Do we have actual company using it? Are you planning to use it in Adobe? How can we involve more companies? Because if nobody is using it, then we won't find problems.
It's worth, in a professional context, again, we talked about the contract, that we're saying is like what we're going to provide and what you can expect. And there's a lot of companies that's not going to be a good fit. Do not write safety critical software on Beman libraries. Do not write API stable software using Beman libraries in your interfaces. Like it doesn't make sense. But like depending on your company, I don't know what you're working on. Maybe it makes a ton of sense. Maybe you're writing the C++ program, you're going to use it for 6 months, and it's not a big deal if it just breaks in 6 months, fine. I will say a lot of usage experience I expect to see once we get our tooling stuff all the way together is actually in Godbolt examples. You may not be aware, but a lot of Godbolt library dependencies that you add come through the Conan package manager. So once we get that story in place and we have things listed in Conan, we will see people like kicking around examples on social media, complaining about things on Twitter or whatever, right? But those will be, and then those turn into bug reports and fixes, and you all can provide both, if because it'll be just open source dev at that point, right? So that is also valuable usage experience, even if it's not I shipped 1 million of these things and I saved this many CPU cycles or something, right?
Well, one other thing I'll just add to that is once something does actually get standardized, then I would think in those domains you can use the library. I mean, it's going to be stable. It's really just a question of before it gets to that point, how much can you use it in production? How much can you kick the tires?
Not API stable. It'll be API stable.
API stable, not ABI stable. That's a good clarification. And I think that lost my train of thought. Oh, in terms of like getting other companies involved, like it starts out with just talking about it, right? I think it's a lot of companies' best interest to spend a little bit of time on these things that are being proposed to the standard and that will be unleashed on their thousands and thousands of developers, right? But they need to know about it, right? And so part of what we're doing is like making these sweet shirts so that people know that this exists. And it's going to be a little while. It's going to take some time for people to have awareness. But if you have any ideas on how to do that, let's talk about it. Let's see how we can make it happen.
So not yet now for big companies.
I wouldn't say not yet now for big companies. No, I'd say big companies check it out. Absolutely.
Yeah, I wouldn't be worried about finding our users. Boost was always about quality, about this famous code review done by experts, and I expect it to be here the same. If we deliver quality, we will have users. If we have users, there will be even more quality because we will have feedback. And I think this is one of the core benefits that we have here, right? We don't promise stability because, well, AWG loves to bike shed stuff. But for sure, besides potentially API naming changes, the quality will be there, right? You should not have any issues like crashes or whatever. And for this, I think you should not be worried about the user base and feedback for this.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Very exciting. Thank you. I just wanted to ask, you have been talking about quality, about usage in production, right? So have you already thought what is going to be the versioning scheme, the validation process, and the release process? Are you going to tag something with this, or is just every commit going to be production ready? Have you already discussed about this versioning, the validation, and release process?
It was discussed a little bit in your working group, wasn't it?
I'll try to address that. These policies we've developed initial ones. I'm sure they will iterate and we'll get better at this as time goes on. Like, for example, to really do that well, you really want automation to do a lot of things. And that kind of automation needs to be contributed. What we have is very author-centric right now. We have a lot of expectations, a lot of reviews, expectations that if we give you a bug report because you don't have CI, that's something that you need to work on. We do have some discussions we've had about it should look like basically major, minor, patch, some ver. You should be following some ver. Not that C++ always works that way, but at least it's a good communication tool for end users about what to expect. This was a bug fix. I broke the API with this one. That kind of stuff. We also expect the paper to track the implementation. And again, if they don't, that would be a bug report. That would be considered a bug. So like if the paper says this, but your API says that, like from the Beman standard perspective, that's a bug, right? So would you have to bump the major version of your library? I guess so, because that's a code change, right? But yeah, so we've talked about that. It should work fine with Conan. And to the extent that it wouldn't work fine with Conan, that would be enough reason to go revisit the whole versioning scheme, for example, right? So we expect to not be surprising. And right, so that's kind of what you're asking is are you going to work with the rest of the ecosystem? And that's a primary goal, yeah.
Now, I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, people back there, are we out of time?
We are. Yeah.
Okay, so let's just take one more question. And then the rest of the questions, we'll talk, just come talk to us. we look ridiculous with our shirts. You can find us.
Or jump on the discourse and ask your questions in the discourse is also a good place.
Yes.
Hi. You just mentioned that the paper should track the implementation. Is that right, or is it the other way around?
The other way around.
Both.
That was kind of like, I mean, you just mentioned it, but my original question when I stood in line was, what is the collaboration between the author of a standards paper and the Beman project look like? Because I sat in the ISO standard meeting earlier today, and the paper was a large chunks of it were code. So how much of that code do you expect to be copy pasted from the Beman project in the future?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Typically, what we see in library proposals is that you can't just copy paste into the standard wording, because the way standard wording works is very different. By the way, this is a thing that I'm planning to bring to Beman, which is guidance to authors that want to write papers for the library. So how do you write a standard library paper? We were and have been talking about other things, and these guys are saying we're not going to innovate on tooling and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I think we're going to innovate on tooling as well. Because think about CPP reference for a minute. How does CPP reference get created? Did you know that people do that by hand? They don't have a way to actually just automatically generate the wiki page associated with a new proposal. So every single time one of these papers happens, so what I would like to see happen, for example, is here, library author, if you write, your documentation in this form, we will actually have a tool that will be able to take that information and create the CPP reference page automatically, so that you don't have to, nobody has to write the initial page. Now, writing additional things around the page, maybe additional examples or other things, the community can continue to do that. But I don't see the rote taking of, the API and, the basic description of every function that needs to be there. That's a very tedious and error-prone task, and it's surprising how good CPP reference is using that approach. So I'm not sure I fully answered the question, but the real answer is, if there would be a way to do that, I would love to see it happen. But paper authors are going to have to be ultimately responsible for, making sure the paper is right. There was one other thing I took the microphone to say. When we came up with the idea here, we talked about who's going to be the people that are going to write it. And you saw David today talk about the fact that maybe the little bit of a surprise is that we're expecting non-paper authors to be maybe the biggest implementers in Beman. So what is that? That's a whole nother person that's taking a look at what this author has specified and actually from first principles implementing it. I can tell you that sitting in the LWG group, that's one of our tricks. We'll take the paper, we'll put it in Godbolt, we'll make the modifications necessary. Can I even compile the synopsis of this thing? No, it doesn't even compile. So there's a core association there. I don't know if we can ever fully automate it. It would be wonderful to see if we could automate that somehow. A lot of times the problem, though, is implementations have things in them, of course, that don't go in the paper for a variety of reasons. So anyway, long story short is I'm very excited to see people taking on implementations that weren't their original paper. I think that's going to be one of the most powerful things coming out of this.
Okay, cool. Thank you all very much.